Hello and welcome to the All Things Social Impact podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Kanaris, and today I'm joined by Tobias Andreassen, and we're going to have yet another conversation about social impact, but from a very different perspective. Tobias, would you like to take the time to introduce yourself, tell the audience a little bit about you?
Okay, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. It's very exciting. Not sure about the, how different it will be or unusual. I'll hopefully can add some perspectives in a different way, maybe. But I am originally from Sweden, so my name, we were talking about that earlier, how to pronounce it, which is always a thing people ask. And in Swedish, it's Tobias Andreasson. And in Australia, that turns into Tobias. But I've been now in Australia for quite some time. Came here in the mid-90s to study at Griffith University, just studying arts and creative writing. And after that, I met my wife. We went to Sweden, went to London, lived in Paris for a bit, came back to Australia in 99 or something. And then I did my undergraduates completed degrees in Australia. So I have an undergraduate in design, in visual communication from UTS. Later on, a Master's of Arts, Research Masters from University of New South Wales, and a PhD from Western Sydney University. And this question about, tell a bit about yourself, it's kind of one of those, I don't know, where do you even start? I mean, it's...
Yes.
For who audience, who do you try to impress? Who am I directing this to? But it made me think, because I knew you were going to ask this, and it made me remember when I got a job at the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, TAXI. Which is, if people don't know, it's kind of an international recognized not-for-profit that's leading in social innovation, human-centered design, and so forth. And I was part of the team setting this up in Sydney. It's normally Adelaide-based, or it's always been Adelaide-based, but we set up an office in Sydney. But before I got there, the interview, they had a few exercises or tasks for us, which was very, very clever, very good. It was the best interview I've done, partly because I got the job, but it was very interesting. Always helps. But one of the tasks was to illustrate or draw up your career up to that point, focusing on, I can't remember, you're focusing on maybe your social impact or social innovation journey up to that point. And I thought this was going to be very easy. I thought, as someone who's got a bit of a design background and done a bit of art, I thought, well, I'll leave that to the last, and I focused on the other stuff. And then when I was sat down to actually do this, it was the most tricky one because it just turned into this very messy picture. Yeah, it just went all over the place, and then it wasn't very pretty. And in the end, I was very, I wasn't very happy with it. I thought, this is not good at all. I look like a mess. But then I decided I'm just going to take this into the interview, and I sat down with them and I said, it's a bit of a mess. It goes all over the place. But I think it worked in some ways. It must have worked in my favor because there's been a deep, unintentional red thread floating through my experience. I think focusing on, or always been interested in things like social justice, fairness, alternative ways of doing things and creating better outcomes. And it's translated itself, or maybe it's been manifesting itself in different ways throughout my life. But even going back to my youth in Sweden, because I had certain friends and the music we listened to, it was a really strong political message in some of that. And a little bit of an anti-establishment message as well.
It's part of the youth journey, isn't it?
Exactly.
Like being anti-establishment, you've got to have a bit of that in there.
Yeah, exactly. And then it was really, it did really shape me. And it's kind of, so when I looked back and saw that thread in all the different roles I've had, whether it's, my early design degree, I never really saw myself as wanting to be a designer, but I liked the visual communication element, the documentary photography, how we tell stories,
Yes.
how we represent others. That's kind of then flowed on, and then just by accident, I've picked up different roles in disability sector. I've worked both on the front line as support worker while I was lecturing at university, while I was writing my research. I worked as a photographer, commercial photographer, but also done some work for not-for-profits. My most interesting journey with that was going to Port Moresby when it was at the height of its bad reputation. I took some photos there for a local organization and local people. So that was kind of my visual interest, and then that's kind of started to change into the different types of education I was getting. And to cut this long story short, the thing where it really felt like it came together, I think, was when I got my job at the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, because it was the first time when my interest in politics and social change got morphed with my interest in visual communication, in design, and to be able to do that under that umbrella of social innovation was an important kind of
it's like the
moment.
marrying of two of your passions, two of your interests.
Yeah, without even not having had those terms in my vocabulary before, really. But then, and maybe I just speed up to what I'm doing now. Later, it then led to roles at the University of Central Queensland, where I led how they embed social innovation across their curriculum. I then moved to PwC, where I've been a consultant now for 3.5 years, and I'm currently the social impact and communities lead for PwC Global. We've got a little small sustainability team that provides subject matter experts to other teams across the world, across all the sustainability areas. And I'm part of the social sustainability team there. So that's where I am now. But as I mentioned to you as well, I am in the transition of leaving PwC and embarking on new adventures. So
A new chapter.
New chapter, yes. But I think that sounds like a truck.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. It was.
But I think my key touch points, I guess, is the interest in really community engagement, working. I have done a lot of work in different communities, both at Taxi and then some at PwC, and then social impact now has become more and more important, even though the terminology changed for me a bit. But now, definitely, social impact. Focus.
There's so much in there. So one thing is, I think it would be really nice for the listeners. I think there's something really valuable, and it sort of came across when you were talking about having forced into this kind of mapping out your career gave you the opportunity to really reflect on what it is that attracts you to particular jobs, and being able to then identify a thread that probably gave you an insight about yourself that you hadn't necessarily focused on prior. And I think that's really great for the listeners, in the sense that a lot of people will be at different stages in their life. And even if you're transitioning or pivoting or starting off, interviews are something you do. And I suppose even if the employer doesn't ask you to do this task, it might be something that's really useful for all of us to take some time to sort of map out our career and see, are there any kind of trends going on there that can give us an insight about ourselves, so that we can refocus, but also answer those questions more effectively. Because like you say, on the surface, it sounds like a really simple question, like tell us about yourself, but it's actually really a complex question, because we have really complicated, life's messy. It's probably why your map looked messy, right?
Yeah. And I think it can be super helpful, especially when you haven't been super intentional. And I think I heard your conversation with Richard Parson.
Yes.
Who's very similarly kind of said as well, his path wasn't very linear. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
And I think when that is the case, we can easily forget what we have done, how that has shaped us, because it might not be something we put in our CV, or it might not be something that we really talk about. But it's like, oh yeah, really, I did that for quite a while actually, and that was really
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's actually the really important thing, because especially if you want to pivot, or you find yourself in that I suppose situation where you're going, I want to do something more, something different. Reflecting back on things you may have experienced a long time ago, and you've not brought to the fore of your mind, some of those answers may be in there. Some of those insights about the things that really motivate you and get you excited about things might be actually in there. And you're right, it's our early life that shapes us, our youth, music we listen to. I mean, I'm sure that your view on what social impact is could be somewhat informed not just by your youth, but you've lived in several different countries, and cultural perspectives that you've picked up along the way, and experiences in those different countries, in I guess in the way they're governed, in the way they operate, would have somewhat influence on how you define social impacts. Has that been the case for you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think it's hard to pick one, exactly what has shaped it. Um, for example, one of the early experiences so when I was 17, I went to the US as an exchange student, and I lived very close to the Mexican border. This is in the 90s, and we went across to Mexico. We weren't allowed to, but we sneaked across to Mexico to basically go to the bars
Yeah.
because you have to be 21 to have a drink in Texas.
Mhm.
And at that time, I didn't have any visa to leave US or to come back. But all I had to do at the border was to just try to say in my most American accent, which wasn't very great, to say, when they did ask me, "Are you an American citizen?" All I had to say, my friends was all you had to say is, "Yeah." I tried to, yeah. And so that's all I had to say. And it was very nerve wracking. But what it really told me, what it really showed, demonstrated was how purely because of my appearance, I was able to cross this border, which is a very fortified, intense place. But I didn't get asked any further questions. And I think
Mm.
it really demonstrated my privilege coming from a country that I'm coming from, and from being a North European and having access to that. And I think that shaped a lot of my later works as well, in terms of understanding how we are impacted from where we come from, how it's important to think about our context and so forth. So I think one of the I had a quote in my PhD which focused on men from refugee backgrounds. I did ethnographic work, spent a lot of time with different communities. But one of the quotes was that a border means very different things depending on which side you stand on.
I, yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah,
That's so important. It's really interesting that you bring up the border thing, because in Australia, there's a lot of people, for example, that the border, you don't even think about it. We're an island. So even less so. But during being a Queenslander, and being people in northern New South Wales, learned very quickly that the border doesn't matter until it matters.
yeah,
Which, when that border got shut and their health service providers were on the other side, or their job was on the other side, all of a sudden the border became critically important. So even in a country like Australia, where borders isn't normally the topic of contention.
yeah. When something happens, and I think a lot of people discover that during COVID, definitely.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think that, yeah, that was part of that kind of experience. Also shape, I think, how my understanding of
Yeah.
social impact. And I think from now, because we provide advice on social impact, it's very, the definition is kind of what everyone has. It's about people's experiences of social
Mhm.
change due to some program or
Yeah.
initiative or something relating to well-being, quality of life, and then all of that type of stuff. And I think that's fairly generic one, and that's what it's about. But for me, the big questions at the moment have been, or the last few years at least, been really thinking about, or being clear about what it's not.
Good point. I don't think that's something that gets asked often enough. I might have to add that in to my questions for people. So what is it not for you?
Well, so for me, the challenge becomes when we are too focused on things like cost benefit analysis or social return on investment. We somehow draw a parallel between that and social impact. And I think all of that can be very important. So social return on investment, cost benefit analysis, it's got its place. It's definitely something a lot of time it can be helped and needs to be done. For me, what I have seen is that if we too quickly jump into that space, um, we get to a place which is I find it a little bit surreal and strange. One example I can give is this. I'm not going to say the names, but it was basically a description of what's social return on investment is, cost benefit analysis. And they use the example of mold, that some initiatives been developed, some innovations been created to get rid of mold in houses.
Okay. Yep.
Yep. And then using some database, they've identified that mold in a house, or very intense mold, can cost someone $4,000 in terms of well-being cost. And that is through some particular data list they've got access to. And then when you have an innovation that solved mold in 100 houses, you can then do 100 times 4,000, and you get to the value of this innovation or intervention, and which is fine on the surface. But my concern with a lot of that is the fact that if you drill down into what is actually sitting behind those numbers,
Yeah.
and as a bit of a project, I have done that on a few different fairly well recognized reports and so on, and often the numbers are coming from either a completely different context, or they are just from a report from a number of years ago, which has said that intense mold in a house is equivalent to $4,000. And the risk with this, so back to the social impact, the risk with this is that if we don't really differentiate between these two things, we risk that we look at those dollar values as some kind of indication of the social impact.
Yeah.
But its foundation is usually very fraught. It's got very little rigor behind it in a lot of ways, even though it might have been done through some very established economic analysis methods and so on and so forth. But for me, when we talk about social impact, the first thing we got to do is look at understanding how whatever it is has impacted people in what ways.
I think that's a great example, and having looked at, I've always had concerns about the social return on investment. I understand the conception. I understand how we got there in terms of using this financial model to bridge the gap between the ways social practitioners and social scientists and social workers and everyone communicates compared to, say, how the business world communicates. My issue with it is somewhat what you have come to. And in the example that you have, I couldn't help but think of vulnerable groups. Now, my sister found herself, for example, and she has a respiratory condition, so that's particularly vulnerable to something like mold. 4,000 is a gross understatement of what it is. So if they're using averages in a place where there weren't people with necessarily, respiratory conditions, the impact on them may have still been impacted, but would they have been impacted as badly as someone who's got a predisposition for respiratory illness, asthma, whatever it may be, COPD or whatever? That ends up in multiple days in hospital. That's far more than. So there's flaws in the model, and there's flaws in the inputs and data into it. And if you have done the legwork, like you say, of baselining the right data for the particular context in which you're making that social return on investment, then there's problems as well. So I see the layers of the problems, even though I understand why. I'm like you, social return on investment, I kind of shy away from, because I'm not sure if the intent's good. I don't know if they're quite right. Yeah.
And I think just to kind of, it definitely has got its place. But I think there is that challenge, exactly like you're saying, that if you're only talking about 100 houses, the context in those are super important. If you lose your job, or if you take time off work because your respiratory illness or something, it could have flow-on consequences that goes way beyond just missing a couple of days' work and so forth. It's a very complex topic, and the problem if we do this kind of analysis and we get to the 400,000 that's been saved because of this intervention, if another intervention or innovation or program can demonstrate that they would save $500,000. If you are the decision maker, you will be going, well, clearly you go for the one that can 500,000. That's got more social impact, you think, because that's what people draw parallels sometimes between the dollar value and the social impact. And that's where I really raise the red flag, because that's where we can end up in places where we actually put money into things that are not having the value or
100%. I think in the social impact space in particular, we've seen it in money being spent on community development funds, and with the intent being wonderful, no evidence that the money being spent has any impact on the community in a meaningful way. Maybe there's few select people who get the grant funding, perhaps. But in terms of the community stepping back on the societal or community impact, social impact, not so much. And the thing that I come across a lot is the stuff that and I'd like to highlight it because I think it's really, really important, is it doesn't always cost money to provide a positive social impact.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the most expensive one, and equating the two is not necessarily useful.
Yeah, exactly. And I
Sometimes
think,
they match and sometimes they don't. Sometimes, you can have bang for the buck in terms of how you invest that money for good outcomes.
and I think the big, what I have seen being in the consulting space as well, if you're doing this kind of analysis, if you don't have the social experience or social background, and I know you spoke to Richard about that as well, and he's a very big advocate of having a social science background. So I think if you don't have that, instead you have a fairly maybe limited experience, you would take this as being a great approach because it's quite easy. You could quickly calculate and you find a database, you get the numbers, and before you know it, you create a report that's got some great figures to put forward, which clients like. And with AI, you can probably do some of those calculations really quick. And we end up in a place that will skew what true social impact is about. And I think
I'm going to play devil's advocate a bit though. I'm going to be upfront. I've worked in regulation, regulating of health professionals. I totally get the regulation, and I'm on board. There are contexts where I think it's important. Do I think social science research approaches and knowledge and experience is important in social impact? Yes, but at the same time, I'm going to play devil's advocate because on the weekend, I got an award, bronze, for the Woman of the Year. But in that room, thank you. But in that room, the thing I wanted to really strike was the amount of people I spoke to who are not social scientists, who are not, and that's part of the concept of this, that yes, there's the professional, but I want to marry these people together. And it's part of the concept of my business is that if people are doing it, like you say, and we know that they are wanting to have social impact, more and more people are saying, I want to do work that is meaningful, that makes a difference in my community, in my society, broader, whatever it may be. Maybe they're sitting in government, maybe they're sitting in a not-for-profit, maybe they're starting their own business, maybe they're sitting for an engineering firm or consulting firm. But either way, they may not have the social science background. But some of them really do make a difference.
yeah,
And they do grasp social impact. And I'm like, do they necessarily have to go back to university and do a whole university degree to become a social impact professional and to be respected by other social impact professional experts? And I kind of landed, and I've grappled with this a lot, which is, how all things social impact came about, was that if we know people are doing it, why not let's arm them to do it as well as they possibly can, to give them tools, to guide them, to work with them, aside them, rather than close them out and say, you shouldn't be doing that work. I would rather bring people together and say, look, the work you're doing is amazing. Let's work to see if we can fine tune it so that you can even maximize what you're already doing and really take it to the next level. As opposed to the hard line of certification, and if you're not certified, you can't do these things, because sometimes someone can do a course. You've been an educator. Sometimes some people can do a course and still not grasp it. Other people have never done a course, and you're talking to them and they get it and they just understand, and they've got a natural affinity and a natural ability to be able to do what they need to do and do it effectively. So, and so I'm postgraduate educated. I've been trained in social impact, and I'm all for that. But I'd love to see a marrying of this. I'd be interested in your view.
I'm totally agree. I think there's a danger, especially in the social space, to try to put down. You have to have certain qualifications. I think a lot of people I've worked with as well don't necessarily have the qualification, but they've got a breadth of community experience. I've done work in communities that have been predominantly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and worked with people in those communities who have intuitively deep understanding about social impact and community impact. And I think if they would look at the example I was giving about mold and money and stuff, they would really laugh, because it just does not correspond to reality. And I think that's kind of the litmus test, Neil. So I totally agree. And I think some of the better people I've worked with, especially now with things like co-design that I've been involved in and run as well. Like the idea of working with people who have lived experience, it's a big thing. And the idea that we should have degrees and certification, it quite quickly go into some kind of gatekeeping, colonial kind of attitude that's not helpful. So I think definitely
And we
cautious.
can create barriers for entry into a field that actually I think is increasingly in need of people with insight and diverse backgrounds to come in. There's a lot of work to do. I mean, there's a lot of things that still need good people in social impact. In Queensland, we've got the community benefit agreements coming in and the requirements for social impact assessment. It's actually quite a small field. If you look at the people trained in social impact assessment, if we take that certification lens, if you want to broaden it, I don't know if the certification is the way to broaden that field and bring people into our profession, or are we creating a scenario where we're limiting, like you said, the gatekeeping and limiting access to people who actually would be fantastic at doing social impact work?
And I think that I guess that's the responsibility of people who've been around for a while to be able to instill that. And part of my role at PwC, the most recent one, being to work with teams and then try to show them or provide that kind of perspective when they are sometimes constrained in the environment where they work, and they used to do certain things a certain way. So a lot of people have been using impact pathways, but they do impact pathways in a very linear way.
Yes.
And that can be great if you're doing program logics and if you're really clear what you're doing. But a lot of the times it fails to capture the complexity or the underlying assumptions and so forth that we know are really important to tease out. So I think it's also about like you say, raise awareness and not approach social in the way that sometimes we approach some of the other maybe sustainability topics like climate and nature. Like social is very different. It's got a whole different dynamics to it, and we shouldn't be afraid of pointing out that we can't reduce well-being to a number, or we can't reduce quality of life to a tick box.
No. And I think anyone who's done a social baselining exercise and the amount of data sets it takes to have an understanding, and even then you still have to go into the community and talk to them to contextualize the data you've looked at, will understand that exactly what you're saying, the complexity of just one community, let alone multiple communities, if you're dealing in multiple communities, is not down to one number. It's looking at the numbers and then understanding the reality in the way people are living in those communities, what their life actually is like and how they experience that. Extremely complex. But one of my favorite parts of the job is really getting to understand the context and the communities that I get to go to.
Yeah. And I think just to clarify something as well, I think there's a difference between people who work in the social impact assessment, so SIA assessment, and other people potentially working in and interested in social impact. So at the moment, the European legislation, CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, they have the double materiality approach. So companies need to report on things that can have a financial impact on them, or financial risk or financial opportunity, but then they're also supposed to report on the impact they have on communities, consumers, and so forth. And that's where it becomes, because that's not social impact assessment professionals doing that usually. It is consultants, people who may not have a deep SIA experience. And that's where I probably mean, that's where the challenge is, because if people have only previously been doing risk assessments and financial risks and opportunity assessment in an ESG reporting kind of space, and then they are asked to look at community impact and how does a company have an impact on a community. When the companies say, and I have read sustainability reports from big companies in Europe, been part of some panels that assess them, and they have said, we don't have an impact on a community really, so it's not material for us. And you go, okay, fair enough. But how do you got to that? How did you get to that place? And then you look at the evidence of what they provide, and it's very weak. So I think that's where I really see there's a need.
Yes, there's a gap, and that is a gap that I think I have identified as well. Talking to companies over and over again, the amount of times I hear, "I don't have an impact. We're not going to have an impact." Is I think if I had a jar with $1 every time I heard it, I'd be able to take a nice good holiday. at the moment.
It's both positive and negative as well.
Yes. And I'm going to be completely fair to them. This is not because they don't want to have a good impact, or they genuinely believe that their their model or what they're doing has a net benefit. But like you say, without the knowledge and skill of how you would actually determine that framework. And I know that's something that I'm trying to bridge by saying, well, maybe you don't need to become a social impact professional, but you probably do need to. There are things you can understand, and there are some tools you can use that can support you in doing that in your job. Not everyone has to go off and do a social science degree. And I think social impact work is increasingly relevant, not just in Europe. I mean, we're seeing it globally, and more companies are opting into it, regardless of whether or not now that regulation requires them. There's more and more wanting to actually they see the benefits to their bottom line when they're learning that having a better social impact program is better. So the bar's lifted, which is a good thing. But when the bar lifts, that means there's more demand for knowledge, experience, learning in that space. So it's an interesting one. So you've had quite an interesting journey. You've worked in the small, you said disability, which is really sort of grassroots kind of work. You've worked with refugees, you've worked in different countries, you've worked in consulting, on a global basis. So what what would you say has been your biggest challenge? And then what has been your biggest kind of, that one thing that you think, I'm going to keep you to one. What is that one thing that you sort of look back on and go, that's a piece of work I'm so like, it's still now today or will always be one of those things I sort of see as the feather in the cap of the things that I got to do.
In terms of challenges, I think it goes back to a little bit what we've been talking about. I think the diverse experience, diverse interest through my life is always, it does, when you do have that, you can recognize complexity, I think, in a different way. Or the different context people come from, and that is not always as simple as it looks. The paths are not linear and so on. And for me, this was when I did my research masters, I was interested. I just been seeing how the September 11 happened. People didn't understand why it happened. And I was at that time reading a lot of Noam Chomsky. And then I got into looking at how media portrayed the Iraq war that was happening in 2003. And I was just like, it felt like, an Alice in Wonderland kind of thing, that how can people not seeing, and at that time I was very convinced and very opinionated about some of those things, but then life changes and you kind of get a different perspective, and you look at things in a different way, and then more and more being interested in the systems thinking thing, which is very popular. But for me, it can be applied very, very, I don't know, not simplistic, but it can be applied in a certain way without, for me, the importance with it is how we are all connected on a deeper level as well. So it's nearly like a spiritual element to it, without sounding too esoteric, but about connection and our link to nature and to each other and so forth. So having that journey and where I am now with that kind of sense of believing in fairly deep things that about where we are and how we're connected. The challenge is probably when we talk about social impact, or we're forced to sometimes by client or whatever it might be, to talk about it in a simple way, that we should be able to put it into a spreadsheet, or we should be able to put it in a report, or put a dollar value, like I mentioned. And I think that's and there's no easy answer. There's no quick fixes to these things. But I think part of the whole systems kind of thinking agenda as well, like the whole point with that, it has to be that we want to create a place that is different and have better outcomes and is better for people and so on. So we have to do those social innovation and use social impact to kind of learn where to go, what our paths should be. Even if we do an SIA, we can identify they need to mitigate those, they need to strengthen them. But is it really about transforming how they even think about what they're doing and the engagement with communities and so on? So to make a complex answer to a simple question, I think that's my struggle a little bit, like how do we do this, whether it's in education or in consulting?
Yeah.
wherever we are.
And the one thing I get your struggle, because the one thing I struggle is like you want to make, the world a better place, to use a easy metaphor for people to understand. Whether it be at the influence level, might be your family, extended family. Maybe that's what you're capable of doing. Maybe it's your community, your direct community, and maybe it's society if you have that opportunity to do it at that level.
Yeah, yeah.
But how do you do it in a way that doesn't leave people behind? Because there's always people who can adapt and adopt new ways of thinking or new ways of doing things and move them along a lot easier. The challenge is the people that are harder to move along, and how do you not leave them behind? Because that would be counterproductive to the whole idea of progression for society.
And yeah, I mean, good question. Don't know nothing, but that comes in down to this whole just transition kind of thinking that we need to when it comes to energy transition. We can talk about it all as much as we like and put goals up about net zero and so on. But if we do not bring people along on that journey and really connect with them and can demonstrate that it's got some benefit for their life, not just money benefit, but something else, it's not gonna we're not gonna get anywhere. And I think so that's a big challenge.
Yeah. And the money benefit is a tough one because there's a reality, and the reality is we live in a fiscal society where if you want to look
Oh, yeah,
after yourself, you need a job, you need money.
super important.
Energy prices cannot go through the roof because people fall through the nets and they suffer. And I guess we're seeing that in certainly places where the rush to the renewables has had to make them pull back because of the effects on people.
And then you
And
get people in the cities going, maybe, oh, how can that be? Because, and people don't understand. It creates a further rift in society or a schism. It's
right,
there's so many things in our
layers.
polarized society that we live. Not so much in Australia, but that you can see, especially in
You can
places like
see
the
it.
West.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's move on to the feather in your cap
Yeah.
that you really everyone's got a feather in their cap.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about impact, but I think my it's an old project I did when I was at Taxi. We worked in a community in a small regional place in New South Wales, and we were paid to go and try to find ways to improve social outcomes in that particular area, which had a very bad reputation. It was a very low socioeconomic community, had quite a high percentage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's families living there. And it was a big process even to get into this area, to be able to do this type of work. And we tried different things, trying to be creative and being very engaged with it. But I did with a couple of colleagues of mine, and we managed to get all these old film cameras from a photographer in the town. My colleague ended up getting them, and then I've been interested in photo voice as a way of understanding people's experiences. So we gave all those cameras to the kids in the area and told them to take pictures of what they saw in the area, like what they are proud of, or what they, just to tell the story. And they did that, and the pictures turned out so quite amazing. So we had an exhibition in the local regional museum or gallery, and they blew them up for free. So we had the big pictures, and another colleague managed to get all the kids from the area on a bus to go there and see their pictures in the museum. And for me, that was a project where we went from having a really kind of specific kind of agenda, and then it grew naturally and turned into a beautiful experience with these young people in terms of them telling a story about the area, which is very positive, and it changed the narrative around it. So that's still one of those that I feel are probably not going to have too many of those opportunities. They,
Yeah.
they definitely, and I don't know if it had any long-term impact and all of that type of stuff. We didn't. That's always the problem: is you don't have money to go back and check, and that you should be doing really. But it was a nice moment, and it was a beautiful moment of connecting with the community.
Yeah. Really, it's a really nice point you make. There's the reality of what you should. There's the theoretical idea of what we should be doing, and then there's the reality of what you are able to do on the ground. But I think that's a lovely story, and I find that everyone that I talk to has at least one of those stories, and it's amazing how many times it's in the early career.
Yeah.
I know that mine goes back to when I was still at university working settling refugees. It was probably one of my favorite experiences, and it still is today. It hasn't been beaten yet, so
Yeah,
I'll
that's
see.
good.
So, Tobias, thank you very much. I know that you've got a busy day, so I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey, your social impact journey, and your in-depth knowledge of understanding of the topic. So, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me. And yeah, if anyone wants to ever connect, find me on LinkedIn. But thank you so much, and good luck on the book launch. I look forward to go to that one as well.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I'll leave your details in the comments.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for watching, and if you're listening, thank you for listening. Remember to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe. When you subscribe to the channel, I get more interesting guests, and we can all learn, grow, and share our stories together. Thank you for listening. Remember, hit the like button, share, subscribe.